Today I'm bringing you one of the coolest and weirdest lenses that no one has ever heard of. And wow, will this thing actually surprise you. So today I'm checking out the Kerlee, we're going to go with Kerlee.
Oh, a wise guy.
The Kerlee 35mm f1.2 lens. It's insanely sharp. It's full frame. It's an aperture of f1.2. The center is decently sharp, wide open. So what does this mean? This means that you've got a killer portrait lens for doing full body photography, and that is what this lens is designed for. It's not a technical lens that you like to think of as being like stepping everything down, everything's perfectly in focus and there's no distortion and any of that stuff. No. This has a little bit of distortion, it has a little bit of fall off, it has a little bit of vignetting, but it is really well controlled, and everything just seems to work when you're shooting people with this lens. This is a very happy people fun time lens. So anyway, just by looking at it right off the bat, it reminds me of my old Zeiss Distagon T 35mm f1.4 lens. It was a Zeiss lens. It made you feel good because you're like, I have a Zeiss lens. The only problem was the image quality actually wasn't that great. This just kind of has that look. It doesn't look the same by any means, but just the stainless steel flange on the front, the smooth barrel action right here. The aperture on this thing is amazing too, because you can also make it clickless with just a flick of a switch. This lens has 14 rounded aperture blades, which gives you really nice, well-rounded bokeh balls in the background. On the side, there's actually a switch to turn this from 0 click to clickable. So once I turn that, you can hear that aperture clicking again. So this lens is also designed for Canon, Nikon, and Pentax DSLRs, and this section here is actually added for Sony E-mount. So it's kind of like an adapter. So if you buy the Nikon or Canon or Pentax versions, the lens actually ends down here, which is a little bit more normal. For Sony E, you need this extra adapter on here. And there are no electronics on the back of this, so there is no EXIF data. You're just kind of flying on your own. There are some flaws, and it does not come perfect. So really quick, let's just go over a few little things. It comes in a box. The box is just a black box, but the black box comes with these awful foam inserts that just reek of formaldehyde. So kind of a stinky lens when you get it. But it comes with a manual, and you know, the manual there, it actually has a little bit of a history about them. The company, Shenzhen Dongzheng Optics Technology Company Limited. How did they choose their name, Kerlee? So it says here that they went through several names and they had a bunch of rejections, and basically they couldn't figure out what to name it. Thus they went with something that sounded homophonic sound of clear, Kerlee. So I guess that's what that is. It also means the root of vegetation, so you have a very well-rooted, clear sounding lens, I guess. Let's just dive into this. Check the lens out. Really, there's only one weakness to this lens, and it's got to be its lens hood. And this lens hood is an all-aluminum lens hood. It's lined with black velvet on the inside right here. It's extremely well made, but if you drop it, you're going to bend it. Now the other problem is, if you put this on upside down, like so, it's tough to lock into place. If you put a filter on there, they didn't make enough hood for the lens hood to get off around the filter. So if you try to take it off, it won't come off because of the filter. So then you got to take the filter off to get the lens hood turned around. Like so. Now the other problem is you got to get your filter in there, so it is not easy to get on with the lens hood. So the easiest solution is just to shoot without the lens hood. So I'm going to take this lens, I'm going to mount it on my A7R III, which I'm recording on right now. And Sierra's coming over. She's a model that you'll recognize from some other videos. And we're going to go outside and see what this thing is like. And believe me, I think you'll be impressed for the most part. So the first shots I'm going to show right here with Sierra, right there. We're going to do this at f1.2, and then we're going to crank this up to at f2.8, and then f4, and then f8. That way you guys can get kind of a range of what the depth of field is like with this lens. Now I'm going to shoot just a little bit in the studio. Alright, I just wanted to show you what a few of these photos look like in detail. That way you can get a really good idea of what I was doing here. Now these are adjusted, but very lightly. Just turned down the highlights, brought up the shadows. That's about it. So the bokeh in the background in this particular shot actually looks pretty good because there's not a lot of stuff behind her. As you move in closer to your subject, your bokeh dramatically improves in the background, and this is what I wanted to show you here. This is outside, and I used the strobe when I shot this. Surprisingly enough, this is how shallow the depth of field is. Now I was probably about 3 feet away from her when I shot her, and if you look at this photo, I've got her eyes perfectly in focus. But the very front of her hair right here is out of focus, and so's her mouth. So extremely shallow depth of field. Now if I was actually doing this for like a magazine or something like that, like doing an expose on this person, then I'd want to stop it down just a little bit more to have those few things in focus. And then the background bokeh would actually still be very close to the same. Just needed to be a little tighter in here. But I love the color rendition that comes off this lens. I mean, very, very clean. And very low chromatic aberrations as well. I wanted to show you this photo here. And this, I just want to show you what the bokeh looks like in the background here. And as we zoom in, the bokeh seems to get a little crazy. And if we go across her, she looks extremely sharp and everything behind her looks good. But areas where there's low contrast, everything really seems to smooth out really nicely. Alright, in the studio, just so you can see what the overall glass pane looked like. And if it's a terrible lens, this is where it fails. And I kind of failed here because I should have done a better job cleaning the glass a couple of weeks ago. It's still a little hazy. But if I zoom into the glass background here, you'll see that this is all really well controlled. And this is an actual broken glass background. It has foiled a lot of my lenses over the years, so there are certain lenses that I cannot shoot in it because it just looks awful when I do. Chromatic aberrations have a tendency to bleed out everywhere, but with this particular lens it's actually really good. And I believe I shot this at f2 just to kind of give you an idea of what it was like when it was stopped down just a little bit. I did two mistakes that I need to let you guys know about. They are two things that I should have been thinking about when I was doing this and I didn't. One was I was shooting wide open, which is not a problem because I want to show you guys what this looks like when I shot it wide open. This is actually kind of unusual, but if I zoom in here, I should have stopped down just a little bit because I got her eyebrow in focus, I got her eyelash in focus, but her eye is actually slightly out of focus. So if I would have stopped down to like at least f1.4, maybe f1.8, it would have been so much better. Now the other mistake I made is I should have had more light in the room to create more ambient light to bring up her pupils so these weren't so dilated. So they had less dilation in them, you would have seen more eye color. Totally my fault. So anyway, that was a mistake, but I still like the image overall and I love the skin tones. For you APS-C size owners, I just wanted to show you this is what it looks like when you're shooting on the A6000, A6300, A6500. This is pretty much what you're going to get. There's a trick to getting this perfectly corrected. So under the lens profile, I'm actually selecting the Sony FE 35mm f1.4 ZA and forcing that profile on this lens, and it seems to be an excellent match. Without it, then this is what we get. So there's a little bit of barrel distortion, a little bit of vignetting, but it's not a lot. On APS-C size, this lens is really, really good. It's just really nice to work with. Now on full frame, things have a tendency to change a little bit. And this is what it looks like on full frame. So let me go over here to these settings and let me disable that. So this is a little bit more dramatic. You've got two stops of light fall off for your vignetting, which is totally normal for a lens that's actually this fast. And you've got some barrel distortion. So again, the same profile to fix that actually seems to take care of it mostly. So keep that in mind. Now while we're at it, let me just show you what this looks like here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this in. Alright, so looking at these without any lens correction on them, this is at f1.2 and then this is at f2.8. This is at f4, and f4 is where your center resolution really spikes. We're now at 4,900 lines of resolution in the center by the time you hit f4. So this is where it peaks out and is really, really incredibly sharp. Now f8 is where the extreme corners actually start to get really good. And this is where if you need to use it as a technical lens, you need to start. F8's pretty good on here. I've done some work with this lens at that high of an f-stop and it seems to be really nice to work with. So this is f11. F11 is where the corners themselves seem to max out. They only max out at about 3,500 lines of resolution, so they don't ever really get super sharp. But your center is now dropped down to about 4100 lines of resolution, so this is where everything is the closest to each other. So this is where the lens is sharpest straight across. At f/22, you can see the dust in my lens is actually, that's sitting on the front of it, is actually starting to render itself. But it's starting to render, and now by f/22 the whole thing is diffracting, but it's still actually usable. It's not bad. We're back down to about 3300 lines of resolution, so keep that in mind. So here's a test for the Clickless Aperture, and this actually does extremely well. The aperture is super smooth when you turn the clicking off, and as long as you move slow enough to allow the ISO to auto adjust as you're going, I think it actually does a pretty good job. I was a little hyper here and probably adjusted just a little too fast, but you get the point. Focus breathing. This lens doesn't really have an issue with focus breathing. It actually seems to be very well controlled. So from the foreground all the way to the background, you don't see it moving a whole lot. So yeah, focus breathing on here I think is not an issue. Alright, outdoor flare control. So the sun is at 4 o'clock, and it seems to be peeking through the trees really nicely. I'm not seeing a lot of harsh sun flare going on here, and I'm not seeing flares come off the front of the lens like crazy either. I think this is just extremely well controlled. So, you know, I've focused about 3 feet behind the tree, and this is all the way open at f/1.2. Alright, indoor light test. This is LED lighting, and I've got my my ISO on auto. This is all the way open at f/1.2, and this is pretty much what I expect. This is actually a little bit better than I'd expect at f/1.2 on this. I thought it'd be dramatically worse, but let's go ahead and stop this down to f/2.8, which is right here, and you'll notice that that is improved dramatically. And the lens flare control on this inside is actually really good. Let's go ahead and stop it down to f4, and that's what you get at f4. So really well controlled flare. I'm really surprised. This lens is actually very easy to use. You know, you turn on peak focusing and focus magnification, and it's very easy to focus in. At f/1.2, your plane of focus is extremely shallow, so it's very tricky to focus it in. So you can see it, but just to be sure, what I do when I'm shooting is I go in and take my first shot, and I physically move the camera away an inch, take another shot, and physically move it again away an inch and take another shot. Or if I feel like I am too far from my subject, I go the opposite way and go in just a little bit. That way I have 3 shots to choose from, and that will let me know if I got everything in focus that I want to get in focus. So it's just a little handier that way. Overall, this lens is extremely well built. It is not weather sealed, but it's manual focus, so everything on here is designed extremely tight. I imagine it would probably be okay in light weather situations. The thing that drives me nuts about this the most is the lens hood. I can't stand this lens hood, so it's going to stay off the camera. I will go get one of those rubbery pop-up hoods just because they're easier to keep in the camera bag and folded up and tucked away for those occasions when I need it. But flare control overall on this is actually pretty good. I love this lens. This thing is actually very cool. So if you want a perfectly good German Zeiss-like lens without paying a Zeiss-like price, this is definitely the way to go. Just a killer lens. So the links are in the description. I hope you guys like this video. Give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, otherwise we'll talk to you guys later. See ya.